Most people are not defeated by circumstances. They are defeated by feelings, not by what happens to them, but by how they respond to what happens. And if you don't learn to manage your emotions, they will manage you quietly, consistently, and without mercy. Most people believe their greatest struggle is with the world outside them, but the real battle is always within. The moment you allow your emotions to dictate your actions, you hand over control of your life to something unstable and unpredictable. Feelings change with the weather, with the news, with a single conversation. If your progress depends on how you feel, then your progress will always be fragile. Mastery begins when you understand that emotions are signals, not commands. They are meant to inform you, not to decide for you. The first discipline is learning to act without permission from your feelings. Waiting until you feel ready, confident, or motivated is one of the most common ways people delay their own success. Readiness is rarely something you feel. It is something you build by stepping forward while uncertainty still exists. The person who waits for emotional certainty often waits forever, while the person who acts despite emotional discomfort gains momentum. Momentum, once started, has a way of silencing doubt and fear. You must recognize that action often changes emotion, not the other way around. When you sit still, emotions tend to grow heavier, fear multiplies, doubt becomes louder, and procrastination feels justified. But when you move, even imperfectly, the emotional landscape changes. Confidence follows effort. Clarity follows engagement. Energy follows commitment. This is why decisive people appear more confident. It is not because they feel less fear, but because they refuse to negotiate with it. Another vital realization is that emotions are temporary, but the consequences of emotional decisions can be permanent. A moment of anger can destroy years of trust. A moment of fear can cost you an opportunity that never returns. A moment of comfort can delay growth for decades. Learning to pause before acting on strong emotion creates space for wisdom. That pause is the gap where self-control lives. In that gap, you choose who you want to be rather than reacting to how you feel. Self-talk plays a critical role in emotional control. Many people allow their inner voice to run unchecked, repeating phrases like, "I can't," "this is too hard," or "it's not the right time." These statements feel true in the moment, but feelings are persuasive liars. They speak with urgency, not accuracy. When you challenge those thoughts, when you replace them with questions like, "What is the next small step?" or "What can I do despite this feeling?" you shift from emotional reaction to intentional action. Consistency is built by deciding in advance what you will do regardless of emotional state. This is why routines are so powerful. A routine removes the need to debate with your feelings each day. You don't ask whether you feel like doing the work. The decision has already been made. Over time, this trains your emotions to follow your standards rather than control them. What once required effort becomes automatic, and what once felt heavy becomes normal. It is also important to understand that emotional strength grows through resistance. Just as muscles grow by being challenged, emotional discipline grows by doing difficult things when it would be easier to quit. Each time you act in alignment with your values instead of your moods, you strengthen your self-respect. And self-respect is one of the most powerful stabilizers of emotion. When you trust yourself to follow through, fear loses much of its influence. Finally, beating your emotions begins with accepting responsibility for your responses. You may not control what happens, but you always control how you respond. Blaming circumstances, other people, or bad luck may provide temporary relief, but it robs you of power. Responsibility restores control. When you accept that your reactions shape your future, you stop being a victim of emotion and start becoming a student of discipline. The goal is not to become emotionless, but to become emotionally trained. When discipline becomes stronger than impulse, and purpose becomes stronger than mood, your life begins to move in a deliberate direction. In that moment, emotions stop being obstacles and start becoming tools. Tools you use, rather than tools that use you. One of the greatest misunderstandings about emotional control is the belief that strong people no longer feel deeply. In reality, strong people feel just as much as anyone else, but they refuse to let those feelings sit in the driver's seat. Emotional mastery is not about suppression, it is about direction. Feelings will always arrive uninvited, but you alone decide how long they stay and what influence they have over your actions. A critical step in beating your emotions is learning to separate identity from emotion. Many people say, I am angry, I am afraid, or I am overwhelmed. The problem is not the emotion, it is the language. When you tie emotion to identity, it becomes harder to rise above it. A more powerful approach is to say, I feel anger, or I feel fear. That subtle shift reminds you that emotions are experiences, not definitions. They pass through you, they do not define you. Awareness is the beginning of control. Most emotional reactions happen automatically because people never pause to observe what they are feeling and why. They react before they reflect. When you slow down long enough to name the emotion, you weaken its grip. You move from reaction to response. That pause may only last a few seconds, but it can save you from decisions you will regret for years. Another powerful principle is understanding that emotions are often tied to expectation. Disappointment comes from expecting life to be easy. Frustration comes from expecting people to think like you do. Anger often comes from expecting fairness in an unfair world. When expectations are unrealistic, emotions become volatile. When expectations are adjusted, emotions stabilize. Wisdom is learning to expect difficulty, resistance, and delay, and preparing yourself to act effectively anyway. Emotional resilience is built by choosing meaning over comfort. Comfort asks, how can I avoid pain? Meaning asks, what is this pain producing in me? People who pursue comfort as a lifestyle become emotionally fragile because discomfort feels like a threat. People who pursue growth see discomfort as a signal that they are expanding. The difference is not what they feel, but how they interpret what they feel. You must also learn to manage emotional triggers. Everyone has them. Certain words, situations, or people that provoke a strong reaction. Ignoring these triggers does not make you stronger. Understanding them does. When you know what sets you off, you can prepare a better response in advance. Preparation turns emotional ambushes into manageable moments. It replaces surprise with strategy. Another overlooked truth is that fatigue amplifies emotion. When the body is exhausted, emotions lose proportion. Small problems feel enormous. Minor setbacks feel devastating. This is why discipline in sleep, nutrition, and rest is not a luxury, it is emotional armor. Taking care of your physical condition strengthens your emotional condition. A tired mind exaggerates fear, but a rested mind restores perspective. Emotional control also requires long-term thinking. Short-term emotion always argues for immediate relief. Say the harsh words. Quit the task, avoid the risk. Long-term thinking asks a different question. What will this choice cost me tomorrow? When you consistently measure emotional impulses against future consequences, impulsive decisions lose their appeal. You begin to value delayed reward over instant release. One of the most powerful emotional stabilizers is progress. Nothing calms the mind like evidence of forward movement. Even small wins create emotional balance because they remind you that effort produces results. This is why consistent action, however small, is superior to occasional bursts of motivation. Progress builds hope, and hope steadies emotion. Ultimately, emotional mastery comes from aligning your actions with your principles. When your behavior matches your values, inner conflict decreases. When your actions contradict your values, emotional chaos follows. Integrity creates internal peace because you are no longer fighting yourself. And when you are at peace internally, emotions lose their ability to dominate you. Beating your emotions, then, is not about force. It is about wisdom, awareness, preparation, and consistency. When you stop obeying every feeling and start honoring your long-term vision, emotions fall into their proper place. They become signals to be understood, not commands to be followed, and that is where true self-mastery begins. One of the most powerful ways to gain control over your emotions is to anchor your life to purpose rather than circumstance. Circumstances shift constantly, and emotions rise and fall with them. Purpose, however, remains steady. When you know why you are doing what you are doing, emotions lose their authority. They may protest, complain, and resist, but they no longer decide. A clear sense of direction acts like a compass in emotional storms, keeping you moving forward even when visibility is low. Many emotional struggles come from living reactively instead of intentionally. Reaction is emotional by nature. Intention is thoughtful by design. When you live reactively, other people, events, and problems set your emotional temperature. When you live intentionally, your values do. Intentional living requires deciding ahead of time what matters most and committing to behave in alignment with those priorities, regardless of how you feel in the moment. This decision removes much of emotion's leverage. Another essential discipline is learning to delay emotional expression. This does not mean denial, it means timing. Not every emotion needs an immediate outlet. Some emotions need reflection before response. Anger expressed too quickly often becomes regret. Fear acted on too soon often becomes avoidance. By delaying expression, you give wisdom time to catch up with feeling. Time clarifies, softens, and often reveals that what felt urgent was not truly important. Perspective is another powerful emotional regulator. Emotions shrink when placed against a larger view of life. A single setback feels overwhelming when it becomes your entire focus, but when you step back and view it as one chapter in a long story, its intensity diminishes. Perspective reminds you that you have survived difficult moments before and grown stronger because of them. This memory builds emotional confidence. Training the mind to focus deliberately is crucial. Emotion feeds on unmanaged attention. Whatever you dwell on grows in emotional weight. When you repeatedly replay problems, disappointments, and fears, they intensify. When you shift focus towards solutions, learning, and opportunity, emotions follow that direction. Control your focus, and you begin to control your emotional climate. Another important principle is recognizing that emotional strength is cumulative. Each time you choose discipline over impulse, you make the next choice easier. Emotional weakness, on the other hand, compounds just as quickly. Each time you give in to avoidance or excuse, making emotions gain confidence. They learn that resistance is optional. This is why small acts of self-control matter so much. They train your emotional system to respect your decisions. It is also important to understand that emotional pain often signals growth. Resistance, discomfort, and doubt frequently appear when you are stretching beyond your current level. If you interpret these signals as warnings to stop, you retreat back to familiarity. If you interpret them as indicators of expansion, you continue forward. Growth always demands emotional payment before it delivers reward. Those who understand this pay willingly, those who do not turn back. Another emotional trap is comparison. Measuring your progress against others creates unnecessary emotional turbulence. Someone else's success can trigger discouragement, envy, or impatience if you forget that every path has its own timing. The disciplined individual compares only against their past self, asking, "Am I improving?" That question produces motivation instead of emotional conflict. Environment once again plays a quiet but decisive role. The conversations you allow, the media you consume, and the standards you tolerate all influence emotional patterns. High standards create clarity, low standards invite chaos. When you raise your standards for thought, behavior, and association, emotions adjust accordingly. They begin to serve your direction instead of undermining it. Ultimately, emotional mastery comes from trust in your ability to endure discomfort, trust in your long-term vision, and trust in the process of steady effort. When you trust yourself, emotions no longer feel threatening. They become temporary weather patterns, not permanent conditions. You stop asking, "How do I feel today?" and start asking, "What does my purpose require of me today?" That shift changes everything. Purpose steadies emotion. Discipline strengthens resolve. Perspective restores balance. And over time, what once felt like an emotional struggle becomes a quiet confidence. The confidence that no matter what you feel, you know how to move forward. The final stage of emotional mastery is learning to live by standards instead of moods. Moods are unpredictable. Standards are chosen. When your life is governed by moods, consistency disappears. When it is governed by standards, progress becomes dependable. Standards define what you do on good days and bad days alike. They remove emotion from the decision-making process and replace it with commitment. Most emotional breakdowns happen in moments of choice. In those moments, the easier option speaks first and loudest. It promises relief, comfort, and escape. Discipline speaks quietly, but it speaks with truth. It reminds you of consequences, character, and long-term outcomes. Winning that moment requires a rule. You do what must be done, not what feels good. That rule, practiced daily, becomes emotional armor. One powerful standard is refusing to quit on a bad day. Bad days are inevitable. Quitting because of them is optional. Many people quit not because the goal is wrong, but because the day is hard. When you decide in advance that emotions will not be used as evidence to abandon your commitments, you eliminate one of the most common exits. Persistence is rarely dramatic. It is usually the quiet refusal to stop. Another essential standard is keeping promises to yourself. Broken self-promises weaken emotional authority. Each time you say you will do something and don't, your emotions learn they can negotiate. Each time you follow through, even when it is inconvenient, self-trust grows. That trust becomes emotional stability. You no longer need to motivate yourself constantly because you believe in your own word. Emotional strength is also reinforced by order. Disorder creates friction and drains mental energy, which leaves emotions unchecked. Order simplifies choices. When your environment, schedule, and priorities are organized, emotional overwhelm decreases. Order does not restrict freedom, it creates it. It frees your mind from constant decision fatigue and emotional negotiation. Another overlooked factor in emotional mastery is patience. Impatience fuels frustration, discouragement, and rash decisions. Patience allows time to work in your favor. It accepts that worthwhile results take longer than feelings would prefer. Patience is not passive waiting, it is active endurance. It continues working while trusting that effort compounds, even when results are not immediately visible. You must also learn to detach emotion from outcome. When your emotional state depends entirely on results, you become volatile. Wins bring temporary highs, setbacks bring deep lows. Emotional balance comes from valuing effort, integrity, and consistency regardless of immediate outcome. When you measure success by adherence to standards rather than short-term results, emotions stabilize. Reflection is another key discipline. Regular reflection turns emotional experiences into learning rather than baggage. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" ask, "What did this teach me?" Learning converts emotion into wisdom. Wisdom reduces future emotional turmoil because you begin to recognize patterns and respond more effectively. Another powerful emotional stabilizer is gratitude. Gratitude does not deny difficulty, it contextualizes it. When you intentionally recognize what is working, what you have learned, and how far you have come, emotional extremes soften. Gratitude creates balance. It reminds you that life is larger than the current challenge. Ultimately, beating your emotions means becoming the kind of person who can be trusted with responsibility, pressure, and freedom. Emotional discipline builds character, and character determines destiny. When you are no longer ruled by impulse, fear, or comfort, you gain the ability to choose your path deliberately. In the end, emotions still come and go, but they no longer control your direction. Standards hold the line. Discipline sets the pace. Purpose provides the reason. And with those in place, you don't just manage your emotions, you rise above them, quietly, consistently, and permanently. At the highest level, beating your emotions becomes less about control and more about leadership, self-leadership. You begin to treat your inner world the same way a wise leader treats a team. You listen carefully, you evaluate input, but you make decisions based on vision, not noise. Emotions become advisors, not rulers. They may raise concerns, but they do not set direction. A critical element of self-leadership is identity. The strongest emotional anchor you can have is a clear sense of who you are committed to becoming. When identity is weak, emotions dominate. When identity is strong, emotions adapt. You stop asking, "What do I feel like doing?" and start asking, "What would a disciplined, responsible, growing person do in this situation?" That question immediately elevates behavior beyond impulse. Emotional setbacks often occur when identity is tied to performance instead of principle. If you only feel good when you succeed, emotions become unstable. Failure feels personal, not instructional. But when your identity is rooted in effort, learning, and integrity, setbacks lose their emotional sting. You remain steady because your worth is not on trial every time something goes wrong. Another advanced discipline is emotional forgiveness. Holding on to resentment, regret, or bitterness drains emotional energy and clouds judgment. These emotions feel justified, but they quietly steal focus and momentum. Forgiveness is not approval of what happened. It is a decision to stop paying an emotional tax for it. Releasing the past restores clarity and strengthens emotional control. It is also important to understand the role of emotional recovery. Even disciplined people experience emotional strain. Mastery does not mean never falling. It means knowing how to reset quickly. Recovery comes from reflection, rest, and recommitment, not self-criticism. Harsh self-judgment weakens resolve. Honest evaluation strengthens it. The goal is progress, not punishment. Another overlooked aspect of emotional mastery is contribution. Self-focused living magnifies emotional turbulence. When life revolves only around personal comfort or success, every obstacle feels heavy. Contribution shifts perspective. Serving others, creating value, and making a difference place your emotions in a larger context. Purpose beyond self stabilizes emotion more effectively than willpower alone. You must also learn to distinguish between emotional signals and emotional stories. A signal says, something is uncomfortable. A story says, this means I'm failing, or this will never work. Signals are useful. Stories are often exaggerated. When you respond to signals with adjustment, instead of reacting to stories with panic, emotional clarity improves. Another sign of emotional maturity is the ability to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. Growth often requires endurance, not elimination, of discomfort. When you learn that uncomfortable emotions are survivable, their power diminishes. You realize that you can feel pressure, uncertainty, or fear, and still act effectively. That realization builds unshakable confidence. Emotional mastery also deepens through consistency over time. There is no single breakthrough moment where emotions permanently lose influence. Control is earned through daily choices. Each day you choose discipline over impulse, responsibility over excuse, and purpose over mood. Emotional authority shifts quietly in your favor. Ultimately, beating your emotions is not about becoming rigid or cold. It is about becoming reliable to yourself, reliable under pressure, reliable when things don't go your way. That reliability is the foundation of leadership, achievement, and personal peace. When you reach this level, emotions no longer feel like enemies to defeat. They are signals to interpret and energy to direct. You move through life with steadiness, clarity, and self-respect. And that is the true victory, not the absence of emotion, but the presence of mastery over it. So here's the ultimate lesson. You don't rise to the level of your emotions. You fall to the level of your discipline. Decide what matters. Decide what kind of person you are becoming. Then let your actions, not your feelings, prove it. Because when you learn to beat your emotions, you don't just gain control over your days, you gain control over your destiny.